They say the things that truly break you rarely come with warning signs. They're not shouted. They arrive as whispers, as a passing comment, as a laugh at your expense in front of people you once trusted. For me, it was a joke, just one joke, but it carried years of pain behind it. Spoken by my sister in law in a backyard filled with laughter and burgers and children's sticky fingers on a day I hadn't even been told was happening. She raised her wine and said, "If Claire disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would even notice." And everyone laughed, even my husband, especially my husband. That's when I knew I'd already disappeared a long time ago. I just hadn't physically left yet. But let me take you back. Back before the silence, before the couch became my bed, before the woman I was slowly vanished inside someone else's house. I'm Claire. I was married for 9 years, married in the way most women are, full of hope, full of belief that if we do the right things, if we give enough support, enough sacrifice, enough, we will be seen, cherished, understood. Our beginning was beautiful. Really. I won't rewrite that truth. The man I married was thoughtful, funny, driven. We had vision, not just dreams, but actual steps. We bought a little fixer-upper on the edge of town, and every weekend became a date with paint buckets and worn-out measuring tapes. He built the shelves, I painted the walls. We built a home, and we wanted to fill that home with laughter, tiny footsteps, bedtime stories, morning cereal spills. We wanted kids, desperately. But life, it has its own plan. The trying became testing. The testing became treatments. I counted weeks and hormone surges. I peed on more sticks than I can count. I cried alone in bathrooms. I smiled through baby showers that weren't mine. Every month I got my period was another funeral for a future I hadn't even met yet. And slowly something in me started to shut down. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I started disappearing inside my own grief. And I could feel that he didn't know how to reach me anymore. But here's the cruel part: when a woman breaks quietly, the world rarely stops to ask why. He said all the right things at first, that we'd try again next cycle, that I was more than a womb, that we had time. But the warmth in his voice began to thin. The kisses before work stopped landing. The "how was your day" turned into silence across dinner. And then his brother's wife showed up, my sister in law. She had just left her own mess of a marriage, or rather, torched it. Drama followed her like perfume, strong, invasive, and impossible to ignore. She had two boys who were wild. I'll just say that. No routine, no boundaries, no respect for space. I remember the day she arrived. I had just folded laundry. The house was quiet. I could hear my own thoughts again. Then the door opened and chaos walked in. "Just a few days," my husband told me. "She needs to land somewhere." I nodded. What else could I do? But a few days turned into a month. Then two. Her bags unpacked themselves. Her boys took over the living room. My fridge became a battlefield of finger-stained yogurt cups and juice box explosions. And suddenly, the home I built felt like someone else's house. I tried talking to my husband, at first gently, then more firmly. But every time I brought it up, he said, "She's family. You know she's going through a lot. Don't be so cold." Cold. That word cut me deeper than he realized, because I wasn't cold, I was disappearing. Slowly. And no one seemed to care. My sister-in-law never missed a chance to make a jab. She'd tease my cooking in front of the kids. Once, when I brought out dinner, she smirked and said, "Claire's at it again, trying to play house like a Pinterest board." The kids laughed, my husband chuckled. I died a little inside. I was invisible in my own kitchen, in my own bedroom, because some nights her kids slept there with her, and I was left to curl up on the couch like a guest. What kept me there? What made me endure it? Hope, maybe. That childish belief that things would go back. That if I just tried harder, loved harder, stayed quieter, something would shift. But it never did. Then came that barbecue. I wasn't told it was happening. I had gone for a long walk that morning. I remember sitting on a bench at the park watching a mother braid her daughter's hair and feeling this ache in my chest that had no name. When I came home, the street was lined with cars. Laughter poured out from the backyard. Smoke curled up from the grill. There were paper lanterns strung across the fence, my idea from years ago. No one had told me, not even my husband. I walked through the gate and tried to act normal, like I wasn't a stranger crashing a party in her own backyard. Then came the moment. My sister in law, drink in hand, loud as always, raised her glass and said, "If Claire disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would even notice." And everyone laughed. I didn't. I couldn't. I looked at my husband, waiting, hoping for a flicker of defense, of outrage, of love. He looked away. That night, I packed. Not dramatically. No suitcases slammed. Just a duffel bag with some clothes, my laptop, my journal, and one photograph from a time when we were still we. I didn't leave a note. I left the divorce papers, signed, sitting under a magnet on the fridge door that said, "Family is everything." And then I left. I didn't drive far at first. Just out of town. Just far enough for silence to feel like mine again. I stayed in a cheap roadside motel the first 2 nights, one of those places with peeling wallpaper and vending machines that only take exact change. But I didn't care because it was quiet. No screaming kids, no passive aggressive comments from across the room, no being told I was too sensitive. Just the sound of a rusted air conditioner and my own breath finally steady. The strange thing about leaving isn't the escape, it's the space. The wide open space you suddenly have to think, to feel, to ask yourself what the hell you've been doing with your life. The first morning I woke up alone, I cried. Not because I missed them, not even because I was scared. I cried because I remembered what it was like to belong to myself, to wake up without walking on eggshells, without shrinking. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew where I wasn't going back. Eventually, I found a small cabin listed on a quiet website for temporary rentals. No Airbnb, nothing fancy, just a post from an older woman named Margaret who said she only rented to people who needed space to heal. I messaged her. 3 days later, I moved in. The cabin sat tucked into a hillside 2 hours from the city. Pine trees hugged its porch. Birds nested under the awning. The inside smelled like cedar and old books. It had one bedroom, one creaky rocking chair, and the kind of silence you could actually hear. It was perfect. I didn't tell anyone where I went. I changed my number, deleted social media, canceled every automatic payment tied to my old address. I even started using my maiden name again. It wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of return. And for the first time in years, I wasn't managing someone else's emotions. I wasn't fixing dinner for a table where I didn't feel welcome. I wasn't bending over backwards for people who couldn't be bothered to see me. I read books, walked barefoot through pine needles, picked up a freelance design gig online, spoke only when I wanted to, ate when I was hungry, slept when I was tired. No schedule, no expectations. Just me. I didn't think about him. I didn't check his accounts. I didn't replay the barbecue scene over and over. Until one night, 8 months later, I checked an old email. It was a random login, one I hadn't used in forever. I was trying to recover a file from a client I worked with years ago. But when I opened the inbox, it wasn't the file that caught me, it was the flood of messages from him. Dozens. I stared at the screen. The first ones were venom, angry, accusatory. "Where are you? You think you can just walk out? You abandoned me. You're a coward. You don't get to just disappear and pretend like none of this happened." Part of me wanted to delete all of them without reading, but another part, the one that still needed closure, kept scrolling. And slowly, his tone changed. The fury gave way to confusion. The blame became questions. The silence I had given him started to echo. There was one line that hit me hardest. "I don't know who I was before you left, but I don't like who I became after." Then came more. He told me the mortgage was falling behind. that my sister in law had moved out after borrowing money and wrecking the guest room, that he was working overtime just to keep the lights on, that he'd started therapy. He said he finally saw it. What I'd been trying to say for years, how I'd faded in front of him while he laughed with someone else. He wrote, "I thought you'd never leave. That was my mistake. I took you for granted because I thought you were permanent." And finally, there it was. "I miss you. I miss your silence." Because even that had more love than most people's words. I closed the laptop and cried. Not because I wanted him back, but because he finally saw me after I'd already gone. A few weeks passed. I didn't respond. I didn't owe him that, but I did check the email again now and then, just to remind myself that absence isn't always cruel. Sometimes it's the only thing loud enough to be heard. And one day I went into town for groceries. I stopped at a small cafe I'd grown to love. They knew my order: oat milk latte, no syrup, extra hot. It was a ritual now, the kind that keeps you grounded. As I waited by the pickup counter, I heard someone say my name. Not ma'am, not miss, Claire. I turned slowly. It was Daniel, one of our mutual friends from before. He looked shocked, like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe he had. We talked briefly. I gave nothing away, just said I was figuring things out. But I knew the moment I saw his face, I knew it wouldn't take long before the news traveled. And I was right. 4 days later, there was a knock at the cabin door. I didn't need to look. I felt it. I opened the door, and there he was, thinner, tired, holding his hands like he didn't know what to do with them. His eyes, though, they still knew me. I hated that. We didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "I don't expect anything. I just needed to see you, to say I'm sorry, and to thank you." "Thank me," I asked, not unkindly. "For leaving," he said. "Because if you hadn't, I never would have seen it. All of it. How I let other people take your space. How I let someone laugh at you while I stood there. How I became the man who watched you disappear and did nothing." I didn't speak. I let the silence sit. Finally, I said, "I'll come back with you to finalize things, to sign what needs to be signed. But I'm not your wife anymore." He nodded slowly. No begging, no speeches. Just truth. He left. And I never saw him again. But sometimes I still think of that backyard, that moment, that laugh. And I remind myself that was the day I chose myself over survival. Because what they don't tell you is this: women don't always leave because they stop loving. Sometimes they leave because they finally start loving themselves. After he left, I sat on the steps of the porch for a long time. The sun had already dipped below the trees, leaving only the hush of night behind. Cicadas sang in rhythm with my breath. The air was soft, cool, familiar. It wrapped around me like a memory that no longer hurt. It was over. There would be signatures, finalities, legal words written on cold paper. But in my heart, the ending had already happened months ago in a backyard full of voices that didn't notice when I wasn't there. This was just the final chapter, the binding of a book long closed. But endings have a strange way of showing you beginnings. I didn't go back to the city. I didn't reclaim the house. I didn't argue for furniture or money or apologies. I didn't want restitution. I wanted resurrection. So I stayed. Margaret, the cabin owner, stopped by more often after that. She was a widow in her 60s, wore oversized sweaters, and always smelled like rosemary and clove. She had a way of speaking that made everything feel slower, like she was always listening for something deeper underneath your words. One day while sipping tea on the porch, she said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes it's not about what broke you, it's about who you become after the breaking." I didn't answer, but that sentence followed me into every part of my healing. I started doing little things, mundane things, things I'd forgotten mattered, like cooking for myself, not because someone else was hungry, but because I was, like buying flowers at the market, even when there was no one to impress, like wearing perfume to bed just because I liked the way it made me feel wrapped in something lovely. I stopped measuring time in how long I'd been gone. I started measuring it in growth, how many nights I'd slept deeply, How many days I'd gone without apologizing for existing. How many mornings I woke up without feeling that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that used to arrive before my feet even hit the floor. I journaled, not about him, not about the past, but about who I was becoming. And every time I put pen to paper, I felt myself returning. I realized something profound in those quiet months. I was never weak for staying. I was brave for believing, but I was wiser for leaving. And when you leave something that doesn't see you, you begin to see yourself. One evening, I walked deep into the woods behind the cabin. I didn't bring a phone, just myself. There was a clearing I loved, a circle of soft moss surrounded by pine. I lay down on the earth and stared up at the sky until the stars appeared one by one. I whispered something into the dark. I forgive you. I wasn't speaking to him. Not really. I was speaking to the version of me who stayed too long, who accepted too little, who thought love meant never walking away. Forgiveness isn't always about the other person. Sometimes it's the key you give yourself to unlock the door to peace. I began writing again. Not just in journals, but essays, letters I'd never sent, stories. And for the first time in years, my words felt like mine. People started reaching out, women mostly, friends of friends, strangers who'd heard pieces of my story. They wanted to know how I did it, how I walked away, how I started over. I never had a clean answer because starting over isn't a single act. It's 1,000 small decisions made in the dark. It's saying no when you used to say, it's fine. It's taking back your silence. It's unlearning the idea that your worth comes from being needed. It's finally hearing your own voice louder than anyone else's. Sometimes I'd revisit those old emails, not out of longing, out of remembrance, to remind myself of the woman I had to become, to be able to read those words without wanting to go back. In one of his final emails, he wrote, "You said nothing when you left, but your silence said everything." And he was right. Because the truth is, I stopped explaining myself the moment I realized they weren't listening anyway. I think so many of us stay in rooms where we've already stopped existing. We stay because we think leaving makes us selfish, because we're scared of starting from nothing, because we confuse endurance with love. But love isn't supposed to feel like slow erasure. It's not supposed to make you smaller. And being loyal to pain isn't a virtue. One afternoon in early spring, I was sitting outside with Margaret again. She was planting herbs while I journaled nearby. She paused, wiped her hands on her apron, and asked gently, "Do you think you'll ever love again?" I looked at her and said, "I already am." She smiled, didn't ask for details, just kept planting. Because she knew I didn't mean another person. I meant me. I was loving myself in ways I never had before, not with candles and face masks, but with boundaries, with rest, with truth, with space. I no longer begged for someone to come find me. I had found myself. One morning, I received a certified letter, the final paperwork. Everything dissolved and documented. I signed it calmly, no tears, no hesitation. I walked it to the nearest post office with a weightless kind of strength, like I had untied the last knot around my ribs. And then it was done. I stood outside that post office under a wide blue sky and thought, this is what freedom feels like. Not loud, not flashy, just clear. From time to time, I hear things that my sister in law moved back in with her parents, that the house was sold, that he's still working overtime. I don't feel joy in that. I don't feel bitterness either. I feel distance, and that distance is sacred. Sometimes people only begin to value something when it's gone, but by then it's not love they're mourning, it's the convenience they lost. That day at the barbecue, my sister in law thought she was being funny. My husband thought it was harmless. They laughed at the idea of my absence as if it were a joke. What they didn't realize was that I had already left them in every way but physically. That moment just gave me the clarity I needed to stop postponing the inevitable. And to anyone out there, especially any woman listening quietly with a knot in her chest, I want to tell you this. You don't owe your life to people who only notice your absence. You don't have to stay where love feels like an obligation instead of a choice. You are allowed to begin again, even if it terrifies you, especially if it terrifies you. It's strange how life rebuilds itself when you stop trying to control the blueprint. I didn't plan for any of this. Not the escape, not the cabin, not the peace that came in small, unexpected waves. But somehow, all of it found me, and I let it. Seasons passed. The cabin changed with them. Spring brought wildflowers that curled up the steps. Summer made the air thick and warm. Fall painted every tree into flame. And winter, though quiet, never felt lonely. Not like before. Because I wasn't empty anymore. I started writing full time. First for myself, then slowly for others. Women wrote me. Strangers who'd heard pieces of my story, who had felt invisible at their own dinner tables, who had been laughed at by the people they loved. And every time they asked me, "How did you leave?" I gave them the same answer. I stopped waiting for permission. Because that's what most of us are doing without realizing it, waiting for someone to tell us it's okay to walk away, to say, yes, it was unfair, yes, you deserved better, yes, that wasn't love. But here's the truth: no one will ever give you that permission except yourself. And when you finally do, the world doesn't collapse, it expands. I started leading small circles for women, not formal therapy, just a gathering, a safe space, a porch, a few chairs, and stories that carried grief, rage, laughter, and eventually clarity. One woman came every week and didn't speak for 3 months, just listened. Then one night, after everyone had left, she looked at me with tears pooling in her eyes and whispered, "I thought I was crazy for wanting out of something everyone else called perfect." And I told her what I wish someone had told me sooner. You don't have to justify leaving a life that was killing you quietly. That's the thing with emotional erosion. It's not loud. It's not always bruises or shouting or broken plates. Sometimes it's the slow forgetting of who you are. And the world rarely calls that abuse, but it is. It is when you start apologizing for existing. It is when you laugh at jokes that make you feel small just to keep the peace. It is when you sleep beside someone who no longer sees you and wonder if you're asking for too much just by wanting to be held. And when you finally walk away from that, you're not quitting. You're coming home, not to a place, but to yourself. One morning, a letter came from the city, a real one-paper envelope stamp. From him. I hadn't heard from him in over a year. I almost threw it out. But something in me said, read it. Not to reopen the wound, but to know it had healed. He wrote, "Claire, I hope you're well. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I finally see the woman I married. I think she was there all along. I just wasn't looking at her the right way. I hope you found peace. I'm still searching for mine." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because peace doesn't always require a conversation. Sometimes it's quiet closure. Sometimes healing is not a dialogue, it's a decision. Months later, I returned to the city for a visit. A friend of mine had just opened a small art space and asked me to come speak just a few words about starting over. I almost said no, but something inside me whispered, "You're ready." I stood in that tiny room in front of 20 folding chairs and a wall of local paintings and told the truth I had carried for too long. I told them about the barbecue, about the joke, about the silence that followed. And I watched faces shift. I saw women wipe tears they weren't expecting. I saw men lean forward, hearing their wives' silences in my words. Afterward, a man came up to me, gray hair, soft voice. He said, "My daughter left her marriage last year. I never understood why until just now. Thank you." I smiled. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like my story was something to survive. It was something to offer. Because when you speak truth, not everyone will be ready for it, but someone will. Someone needs it to make sense of their own storm. And that to me is worth everything. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I had laughed that night too. Pretended the joke didn't cut deep, poured drinks, played the role. But that version of me no longer exists Because I didn't disappear, I emerged. The joke didn't bury me, it revealed me. I didn't vanish to prove a point. I left to reclaim one that I exist, that I matter, that being loved should never come at the cost of being seen. And if I could leave one thing behind for the woman right now, folding towels in a house where her voice doesn't echo who's being called dramatic or sensitive or cold, I'd tell her this: you are not too much. You are not hard to love. You are not invisible. You are just somewhere they stopped looking. Leave, gently if you must, quietly if you need to. But leave, not out of spite, not out of vengeance. Leave to live. Leave because you finally believe your presence deserves more than tolerance. And if they say you were selfish, smile. Because choosing yourself will always look like betrayal to those who benefited from your self abandonment. I don't live in that cabin anymore. Eventually, I moved into a little town closer to the coast. I have a garden now, tomatoes that won't stop growing, a cat named Olive who thinks she owns the place, mornings filled with bird song and strong coffee. I still write, still gather women, still light a candle every year on the day I left, not to mourn, but to mark the moment I finally returned. And every time I smell barbecue in the air at a park or through a neighbor's fence, I pause. I remember, not with bitterness, but with clarity. That was the day I stopped asking for a seat at a table I built. That was the day I stopped shrinking. That was the day I didn't disappear. I began.